Well, I've been talking to Mark Bloomfield, who's head of a business think tank in Washington, and also to Angela Knight, the chief executive of the British Bankers Association. A year on, are they any clearer as to who's to blame for the credit crisis?
Well, I don't think the blame game's a terribly good idea, because you can't actually pick up a dart and throw it at one or other entity. Clearly, though, that this is a consequence of the subprime mortgage issue in the United States.
Mark Bloomfield, do you agree with that? And if so, do you think we've got a clear idea as to what we should do about it?
I agree partially with it. I would say the blame is on the costs of progress. And that might be sort of a vague response, but let me tell you why. What has happened is we have had tremendous financial innovation, which allows more people to get loans, which allows more liquidity, which allows more economic progress. And those are those incredible instruments that Angela was talking about. But the costs have been a lack of proper financial regulation, because regulation has not kept up with innovation in the marketplace.
And who should have...
So the good news is, who should have done that?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's probably some government entity. I don't think I would blame Ben Bernanke. I don't think I'd blame the Treasury Department. I don't think I would blame the Bank of London, or the Central Bank in England, or Northern Rock. I can't put a blame on anybody, but let's look at the positive. And the positive, tremendous financial innovation, it's had unintended negative consequences.
Okay, but Angela, I think there's some very good points there, because the financial services industry generally is extremely innovative. And if it wasn't, then we wouldn't have the houses we've got, we wouldn't have had the financing of companies and indeed of governments around the world.
If I could interrupt you though, Angela Knight, innovative is one thing, but reckless is another, and they were pushing money in some cases to people who obviously were not able to afford repaying those loans. You go in to borrow $100,000 and they say, oh, we'll give you 150.
Well, I can't answer for the situation that took place in the US, but all I can say is that I do not know a financial institution who would want to lend money knowing that it can't get it back. So I think that there is something which clearly has gone wrong in that initial phase. Right. But equally so, you know, we tend to concentrate maybe on two countries, but the reality is that there are problems, of course, experienced as a consequence of the credit crunch right around the globe. We've seen things happen in France, we've seen banks get into difficulty in Germany, to name just two examples. Okay. And so self-evidently, when you've got a correction, a change, to the extent that we have now, then there are issues that need to be addressed by regulators and by authorities.
Mark Bloomfield, Alan Greenspan is warning that more financial institutions are on the edge of defaulting. Are we going to see more Northern Rocks, more Bear Stearns?
I don't think anybody can really know. I would not be surprised, because let me put it very, very simply. In the old days, let's say Shakespeare on Avon on the Stratford or whatever, he had a very simple situation. He had his local savings and loan, who loaned the local person who wanted to buy a home some money. And it was just between the two of those. If the person didn't pay, the bank took the home back, and so on and so forth. Now, as Angela says, for the best, these instruments, these loans are repackaged, and who knows where they can end up. So for somebody to be able to predict what the consequences could be somewhere else in the world is impossible. I think the good news... I'm sorry?
I was going to say to you, though, but this innovation, you both say it's a great thing, but at the end of the day, when things go wrong, it's the taxpayer who has to pick up the bill.
There's something that economists call, which is moral hazard. That is to say, the businessmen can do all these things, and they're not going to be as diligent as they would otherwise. I guess if I had to make the decision whether I would, quote, bail out Bear Stearns or Freddie Mac or whatever, I would say that I think it's more important to prevent the patient from dying than worrying about exactly why he got sick. So I regretfully would go along with those. But the systemic risk of not addressing these tremendous financial failures is much greater than the concern that you raise. Right. And maybe it's a wake-up call to do the things that we all want to do about better regulation.
Okay, and briefly to you, Angela Knight, you say more regulation. Whose job is that? Is it essentially the central banks in countries? Are they being asked to maintain financial stability?
Well, I think it's certainly better regulation. I think there's something about actually understanding business models and being there earlier as regulators. And yes, changes do need to be made, and they need to be made internationally.